Alright, so we all know what the modern system is. Every man and his dog plays this opening where they go for d4, bishop f4, and then they end up getting some setup like this. But I think this is really overrated and way too many people play this. So today I'm going to be showing you 4 different opening systems that you can play with the white pieces that I think are just as good, if not better, than the London system. So let's get right into it. Alright, so the first setup I'm going to be looking at today is the King's Indian Attack. And what is this? Essentially, it's going to be very much like the King's Indian Defense, which would occur after d4. And we have these moves where white is allowed to grab the center, black plays d6, and black will play something like e5 very often. This is kind of the most in the spirit of the King's Indian Defense. And when we play the King's Indian Attack, we're essentially aiming for that same setup. We're going to play bishop g2 here, bishop g7 castles, d3, and aim to play e4 in the center. Black doesn't have to go for this sphere and kill setup and whatnot. They can play many other setups. For example, one of the lines which I consider to be the most fun in the King's Indian Attack is when black plays e6 here. And this allows white to kind of go for this setup here with d3 once again, King's Indian Attack stuff. And this is kind of something that would actually occur through a different move order very often in the French defense after this. You can also play King's Indian Attack sometimes via e4, so keep that in mind. The black would play d5 here, knight d2, I'm just going to quickly go through these moves. And we get something like this, which will soon transpose. Black doesn't necessarily have to play all these exact moves, but very often they will. And we get this exact position here that we have in this position. And here black will usually use the fact that their kind of pawn structure is pointing this way, and they're going to play on the queen side, while white's pawn structure is pointing this way, so we're going to play on the king side here. And play moves like h4, h5, put the knight into h2, knight g4 even, and we really kind of just get this menacing attack after something like a5, h4, black continues playing the queen side of this, h5 here, and black has to be very careful actually, because allowing the pawn to h6 could create a lot of weaknesses around the king. But at the same time, if black plays something like h6, we can play knight h2, bring the knight to g4, prepare to sack on h6, and these positions are very dangerous for black, and a lot of people really don't know how to defend these positions and simply crumble straight away. Alright, so the next opening system I'm going to be covering is called the Botvinnik System, named after Mikhail Botvinnik, one of the world chess champions. I think he defeated Torre to take the crown. And basically the system occurs after something like c4, knight f6, g3, kind of similar to the King's Indian Attack. We're also aiming for King Kiddo, but the ideas are of course a bit different. And here we're going to get this sort of position where we aim to play e4, this, and we basically, this is the setup we're aiming for. We want to play our pawns on c4, e4, kind of get that grip over the d5 square, and then put our knight on c3, e2, and put our bishop on g2 like this. And essentially kind of what we're going to be aiming for is some sort of position like this where we're going to play d3 and aim for a flank attack on the king side by playing with moves like f4. And already black has actually misplayed it a fair bit. Instead of going e5, which is what many King's Indian players would do, as I was discussing earlier, very King's Indian-ish move, what they should probably do is actually play c5, and the positions are still complicated and whatnot. Black's still going to go for the same plan. Castle, play a3, bishop e3, f4, go for that sort of flank attack on the king side. But you're going to have a lot of people who don't play the best moves. This inevitably happens, and so you're going to get a position like this very often where you just kind of just have a lot of fun playing f4, f5, bishop e3, a3, g4, and you have this very solid position where it's not easy for black to get counterplay, because once again we have very nice control over this d5 square. And you can also play this against other lines in the English where, say, white plays e5, you can play knight c3, g3 here, bishop b4, you can just ignore the bishop and let white take here on like c3 or something after something like e4 takes. And honestly, both recaptures are okay, but I think b takes is just a little bit better, recapturing towards the center. And we can use the d pawn here to reinforce the e pawn and c4 pawn here. And after something like this, once again, we can get our plan in with f4. And I think black faces a very difficult defensive challenge here, where something like f5 will come, black can get their bishop out in time so it doesn't get trapped. But even then, f5 takes here, and we don't mind that our light squared bishop is being traded off, because look at all our pawns, right? They're all on light squares. Now, technically our bad bishop, so we can play moves like a3, g4 next, bishop g5, maybe for any double pawns here. White really just has an excellent position here. However, I'd like you to keep in mind that we can't necessarily get this against every setup, although we can get this, like, say, 78% of the time. Against setups where black plays something like c6, and say they aim for like more of a Slav type setup, it's going to be very difficult to get this because they're going to put a pawn on d5, and when black puts a pawn on d5 like this, it makes it very difficult for us to play moves like e4. but it's not the end of the world, and we can still kind of play just an interesting game like this and put our pawn on b3 maybe. And this is another potential opening setup that I'm not discussing in this video, but it's called a double fianchetto setup, and these are pretty interesting to play. Alright, so the third opening system and the fourth opening system we're going to be covering today very much resemble the London system, but there are definitely some differences. So the third one we're going to be covering is what I'd call the Colle system, what just people call in general the Colle system. And basically it's where instead of playing bishop f4, we're going to play this move e3. And in general I believe this is best against setups where black plays g6 here and e6, and this is going to be the same for the opening system I'm going to show next as well. I think this is kind of where you can start to be a bit flexible once you've learned different opening systems. You can kind of adapt, like if your opponent plays d5 here, I believe that if you want to play a system here, then London is probably your best bet, because here after something like e3, where you block in your dark squared bishop, and white can kind of get theirs out, I think that in general black is pretty comfortable in these positions, and it's difficult to really pose problems with white here. But when kind of black boxing their own light squared bishop, I believe that these systems with e3 are a lot more threatening. And the reason is it allows us to obtain our ideal setup a lot more easily. Say after d5, bishop d3, something like c5 will happen very often, black will try and counterattack in the center, and here there are two different major setups we can go for actually in this system. One is to play c3 and kind of aim for a reverse semi-Slav here where we're a tempo up. That's a theme very often with these opening systems. We can often get a tempo up in openings that we'd usually play with black here. For example, the semi-Slav often occurs after d4, d5, c4, c6, and we get this position here where black plays all these moves here. And we get that with white here, except we're a tempo up. And so that means we can kind of aim for this counterplay in the center here with dc5, and our counterplay comes a lot quicker than it does with the opposite colors, of course. So we can go for b4 here, or we can strike in the center with e4. Lots of different ideas here, very interesting stuff, worth checking out if you're interested. Another very decent setup though is involving with b3, and this is something that I had a lot of troubles facing when I was a bit younger and lower grade actually, because very often white just has this very simple plan of going like knight b2, going like knight e5, slapping the pawn onto f4, and then just kind of like swinging the rook over here, the queen maybe, shoving the g-pawn up the board. And I never knew how to kind of play against this sort of stuff, and a lot of people honestly won't know how to do that, and they're just going to get into bad positions very easily. And for setups where black plays g6 as well, I believe you can also play this system. One kind of cool line is that after e3 we can play like this, just all our normal moves. Although I would say that we want to put our bishop here on e2 instead of d3 in these sort of positions where black has a pawn on g6, because unlike when the pawn's on e6 for example, the bishop actually kind of can be useful as an attacking piece, targeting like the h7 pawn. But here it's just kind of hammering itself up against the g6 pawn when it's kind of just doing nothing, right? So instead, bishop e2, kind of just a better square, and from here against something like d6 we can play b3, once again aiming for that sub. And one kind of cool trap here is if black tries to get an e5 with knight bd7 and rook e8 here after c4, e5, this actually loses the pawn because after takes, we're going to see that if black recaptures like this, we can take here, sorry, not pondering the queen like that, that'd be bad, don't do that, and now we can just win a pawn here when I'd say the white's pretty much just winning. Alright, so the last opening system I'm going to be covering today is called the Torre Attack, and it's very similar to the London system once again, except we're going to be putting the bishop on g5 instead of f4. So in a position like this, after knight f6, knight f3, e6, bishop g5, this is the Torre Attack here. And essentially, against a very kind of auto-pilot setup, where black plays very natural looking moves like bishop e7 or d5, knight b2, then bishop e7, we can just play out very natural moves that look very much like what we do in London, with moves like bishop d3, this, except here, the added benefit of having the bishop on g5 is after a move like knight e5, notice how in the London the bishop would be here on f4, and after something like takes, knight d7, the bishop would kind of be more passive, but now here with the bishop on g5 we can exchange this and bring our pawn to f4 immediately, which helps the attack a lot more, helps kind of clear the file for the rook here. It can come to squares like f3 and h3 very quickly, queen h5 is on the cards, maybe knight f3 to g5. White has excellent attacking potential here, and this is very dangerous for black, and a lot of people are going to play like this not really knowing what the hell to do. And if they don't take on e5 like that immediately after bishop b7, f4 anyway, and again this is very pleasant for black, and now if they take on e5, we're not going to take back the d pawn anymore, we're going to play an even stronger move and take back the f pawn, opening the f file up for our rook as well. And once again, this is extremely dangerous for black. And one cool thing about the Torre Attack is, like, for example, in this line of g6 here, aiming for more King's Indian style setup, we can put our bishop on g5, and in general, system look more of an aggressive square, and it tends to kind of lead to positions where, compared to London, where you would tend to put the pawn on e3, because the bishop is on this active square g5, or relatively to bishop f4, e4 tends to become a lot more of a natural consideration, kind of aiming for this break e5 potentially in the future after we play moves like bishop c4 and castle. And in general, it's just feeling a bit more active than the London system, although you could also play a bit more restrained with e3 if that's to your taste. But I kind of feel like the position follows a lot more nicely when you play moves like bishop c4, castles, and here there's a lot of different things black can do. But in general, white's play is relatively simple. We're going to bring our queen to square like c2, maybe gain a bit of space on the queen side, bring our rooks to the center, and kind of just go from there and see what black does. Although, as I was mentioning earlier, like with the Colle attack, I don't think that in this position white should really go for bishop g5, and the reason is a bit different to why I didn't like the Colle system here, and it's because after knight e4 here, bishop f4, c5, black gets immediate counterplay, things like queen b6, targeting the b2 pawn, and in general I'd rather avoid this, so instead in this position once again, I feel like the London is probably a slightly better bet, but it's not the end of the world if you do want to play like this. There's definitely some theory here that you can run, bishop f4, c5, e3 is a thing, and like if you want to run this, I think queen c1 might be a thing. And it's not terrible, but at the same time I don't find it terribly exciting either. Alright, so thank you for watching this whole... Alright, so thank you for sticking around to the end. I hope you learned something. I hope that you can incorporate more of these openings into your own play and ditch the London system, because that was honestly like so 2020. But anyways, hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and also comment down below if there's any questions you had or any other opening systems that you think other people should play. Anyways, until next time, see you.